Hey everyone.
Hi, Max.
Yeah, it's nice. We can actually. Okay. I think everyone should be able to hear us. Please feel free to, turn off or turn on your cameras or interrupt us at any point. It's nice to see people, and hear from you guys.
And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, this is our second webinar of 4 in a series that we're doing this year in the summer. And this one is on destination and community playgrounds. And I think we'll wait one more minute until to see if a few more people join, because we know there's a few more who are planning on attending. And then kick things off. Any questions in the meantime? Any initial thoughts? Feelings you've had about playgrounds in the last few weeks? Okay, well let's jump into the beginning stuff, because not everyone needs to see learning objectives anyways. It's fine. These are the learning objectives. We have a pretty full schedule, so we'll jump right into it. But this is recorded, so you can go back and look at them if necessary. And to start, who are we? The two faces talking at you. I'm Max Rizzio. I'm the director of landscape architecture here at APE Studio. And to my left or right, depending on how you see it.
Chelsea Hoffman. I'm one of the principals at APE Studio. And this is a little bit about us. To start it off, we were children once too.
And we both have something in common, which is that we grew up near the woods, at least, and had parents that kind of let us go out and run and play to our heart's content without too much oversight from them. So this is Chelsea. You were making potions, biscuits.
Well, this was a tea party. In the photo to the left is where we would make potions with the apples from the apple tree.
Yeah, and this is me climbing way too high in a tree when I was 8. I think that's like 60 feet off the ground. And luckily never getting hurt. But these are the landscapes that we grew up playing in.
And those are the landscapes that really inspire and inform our understanding and view of play today. And today we are at APE Studio. And at APE Studio, we have a couple decades of experience working with play environments in the US. We began though and evolved out of a small firm, Jane Clark Tremine and Associate, that was really focused on user experience and exhibit design. And we made the jump into landscapes and play environments through working at the New York Hall of Science. And we have since gone on to work on several destination play spaces and local play spaces. And as we have watched the conversation increase around destination play spaces in particular, we thought it would be nice to take a step back and really examine what these spaces are. So with our roots in looking to user experience, we thought we would start with looking at our users and the children and talking about within these types of spaces, where are they actually seeking to play? And if any of you are familiar with the environmental psychologist Roger Hart, in the 1970s, he embarked on a 2-year study in Wilmington, Vermont, where he followed around a group of 5 to 12-year-olds and mapped out where they sought to play. And this map is the culmination of that experience. And really the interesting thing that it tells us is that they are seeking to play at the edge of the built environment, but not fully stepping into the wild environment, in this sort of in-between space where it's a little bit safe, but still quite adventurous, and where there is lots of loose material that helps them to create and build their spaces. And you might be sitting there thinking, okay, but this is a study from the 1970s, and this is 50 years later, and we have cell phones now, smartphones, tablets, technology. Do children really still play in the same way? And really, this urge to go out and play with and in their environment is intrinsic, right? It's since early human behavior. And the image on the left is a photo from the court painter Su Hunchen in 1130 from the Song Dynasty. And this is like a detour to my art historical background. But in the background is a table that is just full of toys of the era. But in the foreground, actually, what they're playing with are jujube fruits. It's a game with jujube fruits. So they're looking to work with the material of their environment around them. And the image on the right is of two Shuar children, which is a contemporary hunter-gatherer society. And for any of you who are familiar with Peter Gray, we are fans of Peter Gray.
Yeah.
He speaks a lot about the play behaviors in the hunter-gatherer society and how children are in those societies are actually seeking to model the behavior that they will come to need later in life through their play, through the exploration of the world, just beyond, of course, the adult supervision and reach. And so you might be sitting there and you might still not be convinced, because you might think, okay, but this is still not American society, and this is still not contemporary times. And so that's when we would reiterate this idea that children are really seeking out a found space that they can claim. And this video on the left, hopefully it's not making you dizzy, but in Raleigh, North Carolina, we just worked to collaborate and open a nearly 2-acre destination play environment. Very, very successful. The client's very happy. And yet on the other side of Dix Park, there is this wild hilltop, which the local children call Grasshopper Hill. And this is where they come to meet up and play outside of adults' reach, and in this world that adults have not made for them.
Right, and without their supervision.
And the image on the right, when you work in the world of play, friends send you pictures all the time. And this is a photo from a friend walking home with her son from a playground in Philadelphia. And she happened upon another playground on the street that children kind of claimed this section of sidewalk. And there are no children there today in the day she took it, but it's clearly well used and well loved. But in the background, we can kind of see this problem, perhaps, which is the potentially busy street right nearby. And that kind of takes us to the origin of how we ended up with play spaces in the first place. Which is right in the mid to late 19th century, we had these increasingly urban environments. But children still very much have this drive to play, and no matter what adults, what society and rules we want to impose on children, children will be children, and children will still play. And it was perhaps one thread of the progressive era movement that brought about playgrounds was this observation that children are then playing in the streets. They're still satisfying this desire to play, but perhaps in situations that are maybe dangerous for them. And so adults looked to create spaces where they could in fact play themselves.
Right. And in many ways, this was the origin of the playground movement. And to tie it all back together in terms of multiple cultures, it was really mirrored by the Japanese development of playgrounds as well. Mitsuru Senda has a great book about it. He's this architect who did a lot of weird playgrounds in Japan for a while. And he talked about how, when he was growing up, there were farms and alleys and all of these different places in streets for kids to play in. Those eventually got urbanized, went away. So they started playing in empty temple grounds. And then eventually, the property value of temples in the middle of Tokyo became such that they got replaced with sky rises. And it was really only at that point when culturally they were like, oh man, we need a place for kids to play. And they didn't really think about it up until that point, until, kids stayed the same. They kept playing on the edges, playing in the kind of forgotten spaces. But like you can see in this picture, the forgotten spaces started to get in the way of adults conducting business or put children in unsafe situations. So then all of a sudden, culture realizes that we need spaces just for children.
And so now we enter the chapter of a play destination, right? A place to go for play, or the play space. And, New York gets credit a lot of the times for having the first built dedicated play environment. Boston gets credit for its sand gardens and kicking off the play movement. And if any of you are really deep in your play history, you might also know, though, that Chicago has its own weight to bring to the table. And Jacob Riis, who is one of the social reformers of the progressive era, was trying very hard to advocate for playgrounds in New York. And he was not so successful in getting playgrounds as play spaces and parks, but he lectured in Chicago and they really bought into his idea. And so they established in the South District, the South Park Commission, which hired Burnham and the Olmsted brothers at that point to build off of Olmsted's work in Chicago, but specifically to create over a dozen neighborhood parks and really playgrounds. And so one of the really revolutionary parts of that story is that through so doing, the Olmsted brothers and their work really codified the idea that the playground is a programmed element in parks. And we kind of let in with that piece of history so that you can kind of follow with us and understand that in 2008, when two of our colleagues met with John Bryan, who was the visionary philanthropist behind Millennium Park, in order to discuss, at the time was still the idea for Maggie Daley Park. The idea that came out of this meeting was that it should be a children's adventure garden that will integrate recreation, play, and outstanding design. And that Chicago is the one that's bringing the new idea to the table is actually not out of character. And the thing that is really so groundbreaking, let's say, about this idea is the marriage of the child, the garden, play, and design. So that really the space and the idea for the first time was an invitation to designers and landscape architects specifically to come and practice their craft in play environments. That the play environment is not just about play and children. And so this question of why, this prompt for why one might set out to create one of these anchoring destination spaces is, of course, an important aspect of whether or not something is defined as a destination play space. And as we look at our portfolio, these are three of the common things that people come to us seeking to do with their destination play environments, either to revitalize an institution by increasing membership, increasing visitorship, to really revive a neighborhood and inspire new development, or in the case of Gathering Place, strengthening a community through its immediate sense, and then also regionally. And
It works.
It turns out it works.
Turns out it works.
What our data has kind of shows us, and as we keep in touch with these spaces, that in cases we have seen up to a 5% increase in visitorship for 500%. Thank you, Matt. For these institutions that are looking to really get more butts in the seats, so to speak, and in neighborhoods that are looking to really infuse themselves economically, that they have a 70% increase in their population and an 80% increase in youth population. And that in spaces where people used to come for an hour or an hour and a half, they're coming for a half day or a full day.
Yeah, and numbers are useful to look at because they can be quantified and shown through studies. But we also go to these spaces a lot, and the observations we have from seeing the impact of a destination playground on local communities is really amazing and profound in some situations. The amount of pride that communities take in these spaces is really important, and the quality of childhood for children nearby to these parks or who are able to visit regularly is pretty, unmatched.
No question. And one thing that we see really often is that when people are starting to create a destination space, they start with this word challenge. They kind of take stock of the play environments that are afforded around them, and they think that they're easy for children often to understand and kind of graduate from, let's say, that they want something that is going to really be a little bit more of a stretch. So oftentimes I think the community reaches for the idea, and it is founded, so it is not wrong, for height, for speed, for the idea of risk and a little bit of fear, and this idea that overcoming fear is a challenge that one can easily present in a play environment, and it absolutely is. And and it's an important part, and we would asterisk that layer it, right? Because part of really building challenge is building the opportunity to master and take a level up. But the other thing is that challenge, of course, is not necessarily about overcoming fear by its definition, if we look to the dictionary, right? So, but there is an aspect of mental stimulation, of even just like the idea of accomplishing a task. For this young girl, she is working to pull water up an Archimedes screw, and it might be hard, and she might be tired, and it might really be a challenge for her. But if she doesn't get the water all the way to the top, then her friend on the next level can't then pick it up exactly and do their part of the work. And that overall creates this system, which in and of itself is a challenge to try and decipher, to understand. And
doesn't purely rely on risk.
That's right. It doesn't rely on risk, and it doesn't rely on this like conquering of a fear. But the other aspect is that really this idea of challenge and stimulation and engagement is getting at, I think, what we're really looking for in these spaces, which is dwell, that we're looking to engage someone so deeply to get them invested in their task that they want to stay there until the lights come on at night.
Right, and we've been lucky to work with enough operations people and philanthropists who are interested in destination playgrounds that, although they almost always do come to us with the term challenge, by reading between the lines a little bit and getting to know them, what we do really understand is that a lot of these communities, these organizations are looking for longer stays, more enriching stays, but mostly just getting people to stay in these places and come back more often.
And so this now we're just like kind of going to rotate around that same tower for a second to get at this other aspect of like how can we increase this dwell. And so you can see we already covered part of this tower is about a manipulative water play system, but now we've layered on a fast slide and a really tall slide, and it's exciting speed. But maybe you need to do the training wheels first on the smaller slide, but maybe you've mastered the smaller slide, so now you're going to walk up the smaller slide. Or you have the hanging bridge and that aspect. But beyond the actual structure itself, we have the sand in the background and all of the engineering that can happen with the sand. And even beyond the sand as a play surface, we have all of these fantastic plant beds, and most of them are actually are protected with these plant rails. But there's this one incredible detail, which is this one plant bed where the rail is open, and it's a small invitation to come a little bit into the edge, a little bit into the wilds. As we know, this is where children are looking to play. And you could be in this space 7 times and not even notice this. I myself, it took me a few times before I really not just noticed the plant bed, but this very worn path, which has not destroyed the planting, but is enough to know that enough people have discovered this little cut through. And so it's that really like layering of opportunity, not just in the equipment itself, but in the landscape, in the environment, that allows for people wanting to stay, but then also giving them enough stimulation that they are going to want to come back 8 times, as many as 8 times, which is the average annual visitation for a visitor at Gathering Place.
And I mean, for anybody who has talked with us or worked with us or went to the last webinar, would know that we are huge proponents for the play value of the landscape. And this is an example of that, right? Like if you just looked at this cropped picture, that's without seeing the tower that we just talked about to the right, that's a pretty great playground. You have sand, you have planting, you have the ability for children to move around and explore this really rich environment. So that's what this kind of text on the right side is talking about, is that a core part of these destination spaces, layering all of these different challenges and experiences to increase the dwell time and increase the attraction really starts with the landscape. And if you think of the equipment as pictures or pieces of art, a lot of times people think of the landscape as the frame, right? Just the border around it. But we would argue that it's really the entire room that it sits in, the thing that gives the piece of art purpose in the first place.
So another destination place is where, in fact, the landscape does very much create a sense of room is at Brooklyn Bridge Park, and this is Pier 6. If any of you are familiar, it's often thought of as a destination play environment, but if you don't know, there is a whole block of apartments that sits immediately adjacent to this park. And so for all of the children in those apartments, it in fact is their local playground. This is where they're coming to play with a heavy amount of frequency, possibly multiple times a week even. And so really just a reminder that when sitting down to create a destination play space, it's actually a local play space for some people.
Right.
So that begs the question, right?
What is a good local playground?
And if we look to what's written about how to create a good local playground, if we think back on our own experiences of local playgrounds, there is this idea that we're going to go there frequently and we're going to have a kind of independence in how we go there.
Yeah.
And that it's a space to really unpack, role play things that are happening in life, things that you're observing, the people around you doing, going shopping, or conflicts that you observe between neighbors. That it's an opportunity to really figure out who you're going to be, play out your identity. The little boy on the right, if you zoom in, really get out your magnifying glass, you can see he hurt his finger, and the boy in the center is helping him to assess really how severe this situation is. I think that I know, at least from my time as a child, I recall there's the doctor character that everyone says, oh, they're definitely going to med school. Maybe not.
I was the one with the hurt finger, I think.
And then last is right. It's the idea that this is where you're meeting your friends, that you are building your community, and you're working through your shared experience and helping to each other to understand life and really what does it mean.
Right, because the same children are coming there all the time, which is unique compared to destination play spaces where people come in and out and travel.
Yeah, that's the idea. That's the idea.
Build community.
Right. But somehow it doesn't quite jive with what I think many of us might reflect on or see as the reality. And the question is why? Why not?
And we kind of think that it comes down to three main points. The first is access to these playgrounds in the first place. The second is independence or lack thereof of children who are playing there. And the third is the procurement processes that we live and operate within in the United States. So in terms of access,
there's a joint study done by NPS and CDC that found that 39% of Americans live, on average, across the U.S. within half a mile of a public park. And that sounds good. That sounds bad. Maybe a little more information to help quantify it. Or qualify it, I should say. This graphic on the right is a graphic that's actually out of the UK, but it tracks a trend that's happening pretty worldwide. Yes, maybe not for the Schwarr people, but what it shows us is that in the generation that is the great grandfather's generation, he had the ability, the agency, and the freedom to roam up to 6 miles at the age of 8 without anyone going with him. And through the generations, that range of roam decreases, so that by the time we get to the sun, it's really only about a quarter of a mile. And then if we look at actually how close most people live to parks, not even playgrounds, we see that they don't actually have the ability to roam there freely on their own the way we might have thought. And couple that with a statistic from a report on urban childhood that over 40% of Americans believe children up to the age of 12 should be legally supervised while playing in a public park, which is a feeling that I think slowly evolves out of our child protection laws, and of course that varies state by state. But if you search around, there are many stories about adults who tried to give their children a sense of agency and freedom and found themselves unfortunately arrested as a result. And then you also couple it with certain specific park rules. At Maggie Daly Park, they recently instituted a policy where children under a certain age have to be accompanied. And these kinds of societal factors, which again are influencing whether or not children are allowed to go to these local spaces on their own. And the last piece of the story that we just sort of share and complement it with is this article that was in the Atlantic, if none of you saw it, that is looking at what children think of this situation, and in fact that they have, again, this intrinsic need to go out, to roam, to understand and explore their environment. And if they're not given the ability to do that physically, then they will do that where they can, technologically, on their phones, on their screens, in the digital world.
Right, and a part of this is a lot of, some early childhood psychologists, like the aforementioned Peter Gray, in the past 5 years have kind of made a switch in their approach about video games, where for a long time everybody was told video games are bad for kids, they rot your brain, blah blah blah. And now people are starting to realize that they might be one of the final environments where kids are able to interact with each other without a high level of supervision, where they're able to, engage in this type of free play.
So maybe you felt where we were going.
Yeah, I don't think we need to say it, but you can tell we don't like this fact, but we want to acknowledge its reality. And if we could change culture and parental, like CPS rules, we certainly would. But that's, unless there's some great politicians on the call, that's not always within our purview as professionals.
Right. And so we again, as Max said, we have to acknowledge the reality, which is that this local play experience that we all think about or talk about is actually a situation in which children are showing up with their caretakers. In fact, their caretakers were the ones who often have to come and bring them there in the first place. And what that does is it has turned the local playground into a kind of a destination. So actually, local playgrounds also have this quality of being a destination in a way.
Right. It goes both ways. And you can see how, just in these pictures, without us saying much more about it, how the experiences that we were shown before of understanding the world, developing identity, and spaces to build the community are made, less valuable by the presence of a helicopter right next to them.
If you're not with us, if you're not quite with us, we encourage you to just kind of Google around, find some parent blogs, and there are just numerous blogs out there that talk about the different types of parents and the presence of parents and the behavior of parents in these play spaces. So they are very much a feature and a presence. And so that really leads us into this question, and when we come to creating local play spaces, which is how can we build a space that keeps them occupied and engaged other than with their children's play, so children can still get a kind of independent play that they really need for developmental reasons.
And a big part of that is the landscape. Like what you see in this picture, providing seating for caretakers, ideally social seating so that they talk to each other, and that helicoptering is recontextualized as a little bit, antisocial. But it in any case, it really comes down to the landscape elements. Nothing about necessarily the equipment is going to have a massive impact on whether or not caretakers helicopter, right? And this is where the last issue that we see, procurement, comes in. That these are a few RFPs, real RFPs that for playgrounds that I'll show you. And the thing that ties them all together, some are better than others, but the thing that ties them all together is that they're all turnkey installation jobs, which means that cities, almost every time you're talking about a local playground, basically put out an RFP and ask generally a manufacturer who has some installation capacity to put together a list of equipment and then provide the surfacing for it and install it. And some, RFPs are better than others. This one in Washington asks for engineered wood fiber instead of rubber, as well as asking for some more interesting play equipment. This one asks for sand, but the thing that brings them all together is that, we're not trying to, we're not trying to come at city, planners or officials who are doing this. It's more that we're trying to come at the system of how these are procured, because it really leads to this idea of disposable playgrounds, right? And from a face value, that's not new. That's not necessarily changing. But what we see as a larger issue right now is how that interacts with changing desires and equipment that's being installed, where a lot of the playgrounds that if you're in your 30s or 40s, you grew up playing on, were these larger, more opaque, often wood playgrounds that, because of the way they were designed, did a lot of placemaking within themselves. They created these little worlds for imaginative play, and were really focused on that, that process of creating a stage for children to live their lives within, rather than contemporary playground equipment, which is generally a little bit more focused on the utility of it in terms of the physical way that children are interacting with, whether that's climbing or sliding or doing circuits, which is something that you'll hear a lot about in contemporary equipment design. But very little of that, just because of the basis of how things look right now, leads to the creation of a space. And what we would argue for is that you build the landscape out, right? So that the landscape provides all of these things that you need, and you can replace the equipment as it gets out of style or reaches the end of its lifespan without, undermining the overall value of the landscape.
Right, but it's this idea that play is a place, it's a space, it's not a commodity.
And I think about food a lot. If any of you were at the ASLA talk I did last year, you'll might know where I'm going with this. But in the first place, I think because we all work in a service industry, in my opinion, right, where we're providing a service to the world in terms of the way that, in terms of what we're quite literally providing it with, right? Play spaces or parks, or it depends if you're a city planner or a landscape architect or a contractor, whoever it may be. I think we have all of you on the call, hopefully. But in any event, we're providing the service. And I think at the fundamental level, if it's done well, that's an act of care, which is what chefs talk a lot about. The other thing that I think is interestingly very similar when we're talking about specifically playgrounds is this idea, and destination playgrounds, is this idea of the Michelin star guide, which I assume most of you have heard of. It ranks good food. But what you might not know is that it was developed as a marketing shtick for Michelin. And the stars are specifically related to how far they think it's worth traveling to this restaurant that has been awarded the star. And that's actually what these different stars mean. So 1 star, high quality cooking, worth a stop; 2 stars, worth a detour; 3 stars, worth a special journey. And that's almost literally how destination playgrounds work. The really crazy good ones like Tulsa, which I think is still the biggest playground in the country, generally necessitate a weekend trip, right? That people travel from across the country or across the state to be there. And as things get smaller and maybe, different in certain ways, it gets to 1 star. But the other thing that's really true about it is that these restaurants / playgrounds occupy almost all of our cultural focus on the industry. I mean, when was the last time you saw a talk at ASLA about local playgrounds? You see talks about the Michelin starred ones, right? And in many ways, that's great. The current system within food, at least, is that you have places like 11 Madison Park, which is a 3-star Michelin in New York City, which is insane. And people might go to once in their life, but their point being they're traveling to for an experience. And then you have places like Cats, which I know is also kind of a tourist destination at this point, but for the non-New Yorkers in the call, I wanted to put something they'd recognize at least, which is, it started as a neighborhood amenity, right? It started as a place where you'd go get good food, good nutrition, and talk to the other people in your neighborhood. And again, that directly translates to Tulsa, like we talked about. And there are some really great local playgrounds who provide that nutrition, in this case, play value, and community building and all these other things that we're talking about in really great ways. The issue with procurement and the 2 other things that we had just mentioned is that the reality right now in America is kind of this. You have the Michelin star places that we're all focused on, and then you don't really have as many Katz's or your mom and pop Italian place or whatever. You kind of just have a lot of commercial junk food, big box stuff, and the things that people really focus on. And we find that really sad because, I don't need to, I'm not a nutritionist, but I can promise that the nutrition or play value coming from these junk food, spots is less than your local favorite mom and pop restaurant. And again, that translates this playground on the right, and I'm not trying to single anyone out, but that is the playground that one of the RFPs built. And it's not nice in a lot of ways. There's not a lot of shade. The surfacing is all synthetics. There's very few loose materials for children to play with. It's in the middle of a big open lawn, so there's not a lot of fringes for children to play on, not a big sense of enclosure or depth to the space. And I don't need to go on and on, but the point is, when you have, right now we're in a situation where, because of these procurement processes, we mostly have these big conglomerates coming in and kind of replacing all of the old mom and pop spaces that used to exist. So we could go on about that forever, and everybody can be an armchair critic. And I mean, it's a lot easier than actually proposing ideas in my experience. So we wanted to say, talk about what actually makes a good play space.
Right, because if we're saying that, these local play spaces or these destination play spaces have a local aspect to them, and the local ones have a destination aspect, then we are setting out to create a play space in all events. And so how do we do that? And so to start, again, we're going to start with the main user, that play is the work of childhood. This is the IPA Declaration of a Child's Right to Play, that the UN established, right, that this is a fundamental right for children. It's a developmental need that the purest form of play that we are aiming for has this intrinsic quality to it. It's something that is not forced, it is not prescribed, it is not for a given objective, that it is something that the child is choosing. And in order to kind of look to what does this space mean in order to facilitate this type of play is the ability to really explore and engage with one's environment. We looked at it when we looked at where children play. They're looking where they have the opportunity to make them work, to discover. So we need a very layered space full of sensory stimuli and different material in order to make that happen.
And, I think we can bake down, or at least we're going to attempt to bake down the fundamentals of what makes up, we think, almost all good play spaces. And it's basically 5 things. It's attraction, environment, accessibility, durability, and operation. So we'll go through one by one, and we'll also talk about how they differ between destination spaces and local spaces, because we know they are kind of each other in a lot of ways, but there are still obvious differences that we can take advantage of. So the first thing, attraction. By attraction, we mean literally just what puts the butts in seats, not necessarily what gets them there, but what gets people to your play space in the first place. And one of the big ones that everybody thinks about, I'm sure, with destination playgrounds is this idea of spectacle. Having Instagrammable moments, having unique looking, big, exciting elements attracts a lot of people. If those 2 cranes had no play value whatsoever, which they do, but if they did have no play value whatsoever, just their presence as a sculptural element would do a lot of the attraction, and then the rest of the playground could make up for it. But it's, this idea of spectacle we think is most important to get people there, rather than, it's play value. The other thing is unique experiences, right? So in this picture, you're seeing kids, change the course of a river with some dams. And it's an example of many different unique experiences you could go after. But the idea is to create these experiences that either people don't have at the other local playgrounds in the area or in the state or in the region, so they're attracted to, or experiences that children ask for over and over and over again and convince their parents to bring them to. And the last piece is pride for the community. This is a picture of the mayor of Raleigh, who at the grand opening had a hat made.
She made it. She actually made it.
Really?
She made it.
Okay. I thought that's crazy.
Yeah,
I know she did.
yeah.
Okay.
That's how proud she was.
That's how proud she is. Of a few of the pieces of play equipment and some other features on the site. And this element of community pride is really important. We mentioned it before, but to get people there over and over and over again requires, community input and community buy-in, and this sense that people, are proud of it and want to bring their kids there and want to be there, kind of taking ownership of it. With local playgrounds, the attraction element itself, I think, is quite different in that it is mostly about how comfortable can you make the caretakers. And two big parts of that are, well, A, comfort in a basic sense. Laying out in the lawns of Fort Greene Park, which is this picture on the right, is extremely comfortable and extremely wonderful for any of you who have done it. And then, the social infrastructure to allow for this is the other part of that, right? Having grills and picnic tables and these other elements that allow for caretakers to get together to, get to know their community better. And most importantly, to increase their dwell time is one of the biggest things that allows children to then increase their dwell time in the playgrounds. And the last piece of it, why I say plus loose materials, is because if you look at this playground at Fort Greene Park, which I would argue is a largely unremarkable playground, not bad necessarily, but just not, there's nothing crazy about it. One of the things it has that's really good is water. Because if you provide all the social infrastructure and comfort where parents want to hang out for 6 hours in the space, bring their kids every day, you still need a playground that can actually interest kids for a long enough period of time so that they want to stay there for that. And any loose material does that, we know from experience and from research. And water is the loosest material and allows for, the splash pad play behavior you're seeing there, but also all these other engineering behaviors. So between the two of it, you need the attraction, but then you also need parents to know that their kids will actually, stay out of their hair when they're, interacting with their friends and family. Environment is quite similar to attraction in a lot of ways, but the way we thought about this is, what keeps the butts in the seats once they get there and makes them want to come back over and over again. And where there are a lot of things that are best practice for community parks and playgrounds, such as bathrooms, that become necessary with destinations. And a big part of that is, people are traveling, let's say, unless you're right next door, generally 20, 30 minutes, or maybe, a full day and their hotel's a little farther away, or maybe a few hours by car.
And it's really true that a great bathroom actually catches good reviews in destinations.
That's true. Yeah, this is a small tangent, but I think we have the time. That if I guess maybe I'm a little bit of a masochist because I like to go and look at Google reviews of spaces that I've worked on after they opened, which are brutal and transparent and honest. And usually they're good, but you get to hear from the crankiest people in the community. And I tried to sum it up once and to look at actually what people care about. And it's basically what we're about to show you. It's bathrooms, whether or not there's food or drink, whether or not there's shade, and enclosure and all these other site amenities. But that's what people really care about in these spaces. And it's exponential when it's a destination and they're not close to home. Food and drink allows, these caretakers to stay longer. At Tulsa, we were actually last week, I was in Western Oklahoma, about 4 hours from there. And a maintenance person I was talking to was saying that they're going to go for the weekend with their kids because they used to go for a day, but their kids say they can't do the playground in a day anymore. They need 2. So, you got to occupy the parents when they're there. And there's kind of no better way than beer and some food and ice cream. Shade is also hugely important, again, for that same reason. If somebody is spending 6 or 7 hours in a space, you need to provide shade for it. And then because these spaces are generally so big, enclosure becomes really important too. Enclosure, when you hear the word, you probably think of chain link fence with a gate that's, keeping kids in or out. And that is important for a lot of spaces and necessary and has all these ADA reasons behind it that we can talk about later. But when we say enclosure here, we're talking about creating a sense of enclosure so that caretakers know roughly where their kids are, so that they feel comfortable enough to sit back, have a conversation with their friends, and maybe drink a beer, and know that their kids aren't going to run away. And I think this is a really great example of it because you're not seeing a chain link fence. Obviously, someone could hop over this little edge and this little stone, but it does enough in practice to keep the kids in an area where they know they're allowed to be at the time. And then if they want to move, they, go back to their caretaker to ask them to switch spots. The second to last thing is having, any associated amenities to just care a little bit more for the experience of the caretakers who are joining. So in this case, rinse off stations, because there's sand in both of these spaces. And anybody who has a car on this call, I'm sure does not want a child's worth of sand dumped into it, and might be mad if that happened and be less prone to bring them back to sand play. So, these site amenities are important to allow for people to come back over and over again. And last but not least, planting. Plants kind of make a space in a lot of situations. We can talk about this for hours, and we actually just did talk about it for an hour a month and a half ago. In the first webinar we did this summer called Build a Hill and Plant Some Trees, which I think this QR code connects you to it. But we can also send you a link to it after if you were one of the people on the call who didn't attend last time. The reason we're showing it on the slide dedicated to the environment of local play is this hour-long talk is kind of just about this exact slide, and unpacks it a lot better. But the big takeaway is that, again, landscape is the base, and creating an environment, creating a pleasant place to be in is the most important part, and in many situations is more important than any equipment that you put in it itself. Accessibility is, it's a buzzword nowadays. Everybody thinks about it. The United States was the first to pass a really holistic and forward-thinking code when they passed the ADA, 35 years ago now. And since we've progressed as a society, the ADA isn't perfect anymore. And when we talk about accessibility, when we're about to, what we mean is everything beyond the ADA. Obviously, all the boxes of the ADA will be checked in any of the spaces that we work on. I assume it's the same for all of you on the call. When we're thinking about accessibility, we're really thinking about either universal design or, very tailored moments for specific community groups. And when it comes to destination play, we need the former, right? This idea of universal design. And that's because they're spaces that are encouraging, everyone to visit them. So, there are some, let's say, slam dunks of experiences that you can design that are just as good for aging people or children in wheelchairs or children on the spectrum, like this suspension bridge that moves as people walk across it, and the experience of all of those people is the same in that environment and with that play feature. And then there's some compromises that we need to make, where in this middle picture, this little boat, it rocks from side to side. It's beloved by everybody from babies who are being rocked in it by their moms to adult men who like to see if they can knock each other off of it.
They can fit on
Yeah, exactly. And really everything in between. But the most stringent ADA consultants would tell you that it's technically not fully accessible because it's a moving platform, because it's on these chains. So a person couldn't transfer out of the wheelchair and onto it with their own volition. And that's not to say, that would be okay for an entire play space, but rather that, the whole play space will be accessible. And then once we start thinking about these individual moments, we have to think a lot more about the experience and the people who are actually visiting. And we know that with a destination space, caretakers are always there, and especially caretakers of children with disabilities. And the experience of a child who doesn't have lower body mobility sitting in this and rocking is wonderful. And although they might not be able to transfer in of their own volition, we know from experience and from watching these spaces function that their caretakers will help them in. So there's these compromises where you have to really think beyond just yes or no, does this check the box, and more about how does this actual experience or piece allow the widest range of disabilities to interact with it and have a meaningful experience. And if you do that, if you think through these experiences and you work with ADA consultants who are amazing, and we can recommend some really great ones, and learn from people in the communities about their hardships, you start to realize that design for disability is really designed for everyone. There's tons of examples about this, but I think the most easy to point out is this picture on the right, which is the similarity between the needs of strollers and wheelchairs, right? Your 5% ADA path turns out is actually perfect for the fleet of strollers that will come to all of these spaces. When it comes to local play, accessibility can be a little bit more nuanced, because we have to think about local playgrounds as a piece of a larger tapestry of a community, right? So if you're thinking about the playground individually in the first place, and you're looking at, the community that is around it, and you notice that that community has a predominantly large amount of wheelchair users that don't have upper body mobility or have a specific disability, then you can design the space for them in a way that obviously everything will still meet ADA, but you can design it tailored for this community group, which might mean, very stable rubber surfacing, equipment that's designed specifically to be able to be used without leaving your wheelchair, and a lot of other features like that. But on the other hand, if you look and the community has a large number of children on the spectrum, I would argue that this playground on the left is actually a pretty bad fit for that community, and that it's very open. The color of that bright orange is very stimulating. There's not a lot of, nature or calming element or sensory or calming elements around it. And that's where this picture in the middle comes in, and that tower in the middle of this beautiful woodland might not be the most accessible for a child in a wheelchair. They can still get up to the base of it and still interact with it. Again, check all the boxes, make sure that it still has a base level of accessibility, but that once that's met, you can do these really amazing things to cater to this specific group. And when you zoom out a little bit farther and look at it as a whole, if this orange playground on the left already existed in a community, then maybe the right thing to do is to provide the playground in the middle so that you have a larger tapestry that is really accessible to a wide range of people in that community without necessarily needing to have every single individual playground be the best for everybody, right? Or rather be a compromise for everybody. And the last piece is also look, accessibility as we're talking about it is not just for people with disabilities, it's for everybody. So also look at your population data, look at things like if there's a large group of aging people, and if there is, think about how we can welcome them into the space as well. Again, just building to this community tapestry of local playgrounds. The one of the last things we'll say, and we're nearing the end now, so I'll go a little quick so we have time for questions and answers, is durability. And when we talk about durability, and we're thinking about the durability of the playground in a material sense, which in destination playgrounds needs to be quite robust because you might have 1 million or upwards of 3 million visitors a year, like Gathering Place does. And that means using, very thought through detailed stone, wood in the right contexts, that can withstand, this wear and tear. Yeah.
This weekend, yeah.
But it also means providing infrastructure to protect the more fragile elements like the plant beds. This is at Brooklyn Bridge Park, and you can see, those plant rails serve as both seats and to protect the hydrangeas behind them. And then also, thinking through the total time frame of these playgrounds, right? Because when it comes to a destination playground, one of the things that's somewhat unique about these spaces is that you need this level of experiential continuity. You want somebody who comes on the first day to have an incredible experience, and you want somebody who comes 10 years later to have a relatively similar incredible experience, right? So when we do that, we have to acknowledge the lifespan of individual pieces within the environment, because we want to design things for 100 years, right? Not for 10 years. So this picture on the far right, you see this boulder that weighs 40 tons and was dropped in there by a 50-ton crane, which I think actually broke because it was so heavy. And I think you'd be very hard pressed to ever move this boulder. It's going to be there for as long as the park exists, I'm sure. But this wooden playground on the top, this wooden playhouse on the top, doesn't have as long of a lifespan, in a destination environment on the top end, we're looking at 25, 30 years. And you have to think about that at the beginning so that 25, 30 years from now, this piece of equipment can be replaced without undermining the value of the larger or the experience of the larger space. In local play, that idea is very similar, but flipped on its head a little bit in that we think of durability of play value and of experience in local playgrounds as really having to do with flexibility. And that can be flexibility of the play style, as you see on the right here. This is a local playground outside of Munich, where the combination of sand and water provides kind of limitless play work and limitless engagement, where kids, start going there when they're 2 or 3 and keep going there until they're in their young teens. And the other side of it can just be flexibility in terms of the installation conditions, right? Where this is an extremely beautiful local playground, and in 10 years, if the needs of a community aren't being met, or equipment has reached its lifespan, or for any other given number of reasons, you could pull out that equipment and replace it with something new, again, without undermining the value of the overall space. And last but not least, our favorite people in playgrounds, other than children maybe, are the operations people that we work with. It turns out the Field of Dreams movie was right. If you build it, they will come. There is almost always more people in destination playgrounds than you expect. We learned the other day that the original estimation for Gathering Place was 1 million, and they have 2 to 3 a year. So providing the infrastructure for that is really important, like these wider paths to allow for strollers. Maybe they could have been even a little wider than that. And also, understanding how important wayfinding is to the overall site. These spaces are big and hard to navigate in a lot of situations.
Absolutely. And so we have found that, in fact, the provision of a map in a play environment is almost really required in these spaces at times, which is a funny thing to think about when you think about mapping a playground. But in the same way that like wayfinding is a consideration, really when it comes down to operations, the story is just being able to bring more resources to bear in acknowledgement that you have more foot traffic in these spaces. And so we have this image of a cableway, which in a local playground, let's say in a community setting, the cable that holds the cableway would last 10 years on average. And in a setting that has 3 million visitors a year, it lasts 2 years tops. So just this resource planning when it comes to M&O is absolutely something that is much heavier when it comes to these destination environments.
And it's what makes them in a lot of situations so special. Having somebody who really cares about the park every day, being there, taking care of it, takes great play spaces and makes them, amazing.
And when the bathrooms are clean, you'll get the review.
You'll get a good Google review. For local playgrounds, I think I assume everybody on this call is generally aware of local maintenance limits throughout the US. It depends on the municipality, of course, and it depends on the staff who actually will be working on it. But a lot of the time, it's limited to eventual replacement of a space and, cutting lawn. And we should take advantage of those resources if we can. Designing within limits makes some of the most exciting spaces. So on one hand, using static equipment, our colleague who's in the other room coined a term a long time ago about, static maintenance, static equipment. So using things that will last for a very long time with very minimal input from maintenance people on a day-to-day basis. And then also, when you want things that are a little bit more dynamic, planning for the maintenance that's there. I would argue that this playground that you see in the right picture is perfect in many ways and amazing. And all it takes is somebody to mow it and then otherwise kind of leave it alone.
And the trail along the ridgeline tells you it's well loved and well used.
Right. And, you could even argue that maybe the fact that people don't give it as much focus can be used for really deep play. This is, I'll say this very quickly. And if anybody's interested, I can send it to you. It's a really good read. It's from 1903. Early 1900s, and it's a story in this small town of how somebody dumped a big pile of sand in the town, and how they basically just didn't touch it. And over the years, kids, for the first year, the kids dug canals and made these sort of engineering moves. And then over a period of 10 years, they eventually developed a society. They had currency, they had houses that were their own. They met together at the beginning of every season and talked about how they would reallocate currency to be the most fun. They had crops and farm animals. It's really an amazing read. And it's only possible, this level of really deep continuing community play is only possible if you don't have a maintenance person breaking up their little work every day. So we can take these things that normally disappoint us and use them for good if we put the thought into it. And that's really it. We'll leave you with these last few things, the highlights, we hope, of this talk, which is, all destination playgrounds are local playgrounds, and all local playgrounds are destination playgrounds. You have to think through every aspect of them when you're designing either space. Free play is the deepest play, and caretakers get in the way.
So how can we acknowledge that the caretakers are there and really provide for them while still making sure that the children can have the best experience, because it is their experience, because children need agency, and the world today doesn't actually give them a lot of independence. It doesn't give them a lot of freedom, but the playground is their space. That is where they should have the ability to really control their environment and play and modify it.
Where writing on the walls should be encouraged.
That's right.
And
So let them build, which is a great segue into.
We have another webinar coming up. 3 out of 4. This will be the 3rd out of 4. Which is about manipulative water play for environmental education. It'll be on July 29th at 1 p.m. I hope anybody here tunes in. We can send links. Well, I'm sure we will send links about it afterwards, but also, please reach out. Our emails are on the bottom right of this corner, and thank you for being with us for 2 minutes over an hour. We can open it all up to questions now, or we can look into the Q&A if anybody left any there. I will stop sharing and open up the Q&A. So Sarah Williams asked, sand and water are always great, but how do you discuss this with cities for local playground design or HOAs who don't want it due to the maintenance and mess? How do you recommend water also in these considerations when in drought conditions?
Well, I certainly would say that we're going to give a webinar that will definitely address some of these, but I think it is a valid question, and it is a valid concern. There is lots of literature and studies that tell us that this ability to manipulate and the use of sand and water really increases dwell time. It has a lot of positive benefits. It increases the number of users that are coming to the space, but if it cannot be maintained, then the quality of the space won't be maintained. And so it actually won't, in fact, be a space that people want to come to and again and again. And so it is a concern that has to be addressed and shouldn't just be forced on someone. And the opportunity to involve the maintenance teams, to really talk with them about their concerns and their resources, their ability to manage it, and get their buy-in and get them on board early in the process of creating one of these spaces is really important. And if they really can't come to the table and get excited about sand, there are other loose materials that you can bring to bear.
Yeah, right.
Plant material.
Planting is a great example of one where very few cities in our experience limit plants in playgrounds. And the great thing about plants is that they're a regenerative loose material, right? So if somebody's being really strict about no sand, but is okay with water, make sure you have plants next to it and make sure that kids are going to tear the leaves off and use them as boats or as dams or anything else. The other thing too, I'd say, just elaborating on something Chelsea said a little bit, is that if you have the option to get, or the ability to get, the actual maintenance people on the same call as the planner, who sometimes is playing a game of telephone between them and you can talk to them and involve them and say, okay, we understand you've had this bad experience with sand before, or you're worried about the maintenance. What if we sink it in this bowl? What if we provide drainage in this way? What if the water, it's not going to be a splash pad? What if it's just a single pump that's just connected to potable irrigation? And to your point about droughts, like creates a handful of gallons a day instead of 30,000 gallons a day, like a splash pad would. Or if you're really worried about droughts and you irrigate already, what if we just treated this as an irrigation bypass and invested? They're actually quite cheap, like $5,000 in a basin to collect a little bit of water and pump it back into the irrigation systems. I think the big thing is there's lots of different avenues to find compromise. And we've always had pretty good luck with it. Not that we get sand every time, but rather that once, most people in these situations have kids, they want good experience for their kids who are going to be playing in this space. And once they understand that how beneficial manipulatable materials are, they're willing to compromise a little bit on the execution of it.
But right, and you absolutely have to open the conversation in order to get there and to listen.
Yeah. Benjamin Boyd, can the recording transcript be made available after this presentation? Yes, definitely. It will be uploaded and shared with you.
We were supposed to say that.
Oh yeah, we were supposed to say that.
Thank you for prompting us to say that.
Yes. Also, there will be a form if you want your CEUs. There'll be like a quiz, and people who have CEUs know what I'm talking about. You're going to get it after the call. Susan Hall, for the super duper long slides, how do you design them not to be the high speed slide that catapults people onto the ground like in Boston? Do you want to tell the story or should I? The software they have.
No, I know. You can tell. You're more excited about it.
I like it. Okay. So Richter, the playground manufacturer that we work with predominantly, has
who's responsible for most of the high slides we're talking about, yes.
Has a software that they've developed that they use every time they design a slide, which might annoy designers sometimes because they're like, oh, well, my slope needs to, does it really need to be this steep, or can it be steeper, blah, 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 and it can. It's because they've calculated it, and it's based on a set of